So hello, everybody. Welcome to JSConf 2011. It's awesome. Thanks to the organizers and Malte and Jan and Holger for having me here, and everyone else who's helped out. Berlin's an awesome city, so thank you to everyone who lives here for showing us all a good time. So, prologue. I'm going to talk about making lasers for a bit. When I was a little kid, I wasn't pleased with video games or anything. I really harassed my parents constantly, and I would always come up to them and be like, I want to make something. I don't want to just do something, I want to make something. And so the story is that I found anything that I could find in my house, would cobble them together into like the weirdest arrays of what I called robots or lasers. And basically a laser was a flashlight and a mirror and a prism and an old telegraphic photo lens that focused light, and I thought it was the coolest thing ever, and it was all strapped to like a, just a big wooden board, and that was making something. That was me then. You can check out my sweet, awesome Beethoven, the movie, long sleeve shirt, because that's how cool I was. That's my little brother too. So quickly about me, I'm the Samia guy. If you recognize where that source picture is from, you get a beer. I'm the CTO of a company in the US called Paperless Post. We do online invitations and stationery. We have a pretty large team and a pretty large app, and we're growing pretty quickly. But thanks to them, I'm out here and can talk to you guys. I'm the lover of food. I'm a lover of food. I started a thing called Code Food Bar. If any of you guys came on Friday night or last night to the dinner, that was actually, I did nothing for that. That was all Tiffany, and we can thank her for that. But I started a thing where nerds get together and eat, because I like eating better than I like drinking, to be honest. But when you combine them both, you know, that's the real magic. So today's talk, the title changed a little bit. It's called Your Framework Sucks and So Does Mine. But it's going to be a little bit of a rant, and a little bit of maybe some knowledge will be transmitted. So I'm going to go over kind of myths and truths of frameworks, and specifically client-side web frameworks and what that means. So there are a couple myths that come up when you talk about client-side frameworks, and they mainly revolve around like creation myths and then like propagation myths. Like creation myths as in how these frameworks came about and came into being, and propagation myths like how they became popular and why they should be popular. So probably the biggest one is the myth of extraction. And you know, it's a real myth, because frameworks aren't like these immaculate conceptions. They're not like all of a sudden there was an app, and then out of this app sprung this framework, the greatest framework that was ever created. The most popular myth is probably Rails, and Marcel Molina gave a talk at, I think it was Scottish RubyConf 2 years ago, where he talked about, kind of actually went through all the, in a very, very nerdy and like comic book guy way, went through all the mailing list archives of RubyLang around the time that Rails was released, and it was really, really obvious that Basecamp was happening and Rails was happening, but it wasn't like Basecamp and then we pulled Rails out of Basecamp. That just didn't happen. Frameworks grow, they don't just spring out of nothing. And frameworks, what they really are like combinations of a couple things: abstractions, like trying to pull common things into abstract patterns that can be reused, tools like generators and stuff like that, patterns, actual, not forcing you into a pattern or not the abstractions of the patterns themselves, but just patterns like MVC and MVVVVVC and stuff like that. Also, frameworks can also be combinations of existing frameworks. And a lot of JavaScript frameworks these days, the bigger ones, are built on top of jQuery or combine jQuery and something else to make the new framework. What they also are experiments, and the framework that I created in what really brings me here today is Samia.js. And Samia.js was really, I'm not going to lie, I didn't extract it out of some awesome app that I wrote. It really was just an experiment. It was, can we take something like Sinatra, which is a Ruby framework that I really loved and was super simple, and translate it to the web and translate it into JavaScript. So this is what a Sinatra application looks like. You don't need to know Ruby to read this, but basically you define an app that's just a class that descends from Sinatra application, and you define a route, which is a path, and then what happens in that route where you render the index template. It's really, really simple. So this is what it looks like in Sammy. I mean, the original sketches for Sammy were literally just a gist. I could probably point people to that gist, but it was like, since Ruby has blocks and JavaScript has this callback or first class function pattern, we can do some similar things. And hey, maybe this could be interesting. Maybe this could have use cases beyond just an experiment. And actually, it was Alex standing next to me who realized that, hey, this pattern of having a controller is really useful for things like CouchDB, where you don't necessarily have a middle tier, and you can just have Sammy and this controller pattern living completely in the browser and living just in the database itself. And I talked about that last year, but it's a really interesting pattern, and it's not something that I initially thought of as a use case for Sammy, but it ended up being the best use case. So another myth is smaller is better, and this is kind of a recent one, and I'll have to fist fight with Jed about this, but basically the myth is that it doesn't. I mean, obviously there are reasons to have small code, especially on the client side. It does actually matter, but the myth that it matters foremost is kind of ridiculous. Most people cite the need for speed, obviously we're downloading all the code in the browser, so the smaller your code is, the faster it'll be or the faster it'll download. But really, most people are running, most developers at least are probably running on high-speed connections, and the difference between a kilobyte or two really, once it's cached, is not really going to make that big a difference. And what ends up happening is people extract so much of the core that they really end up with less. When you take stuff away, you take stuff away. Obviously, there's a point where you can actually refactor stuff and make stuff smaller and make it faster and make it better. But when you're actually taking whole chunks out of a framework or whole chunks out of an existing tool, you're probably losing some stuff. And that stuff you might end up having to recreate and create your own version of it, which might not be as good as the original version. So less actually means less, and smaller doesn't always mean better. Really, it's about balance. And balance is a couple things, but here I'm talking about readability and maintainability versus the lines of code. So, you can write everything in 140 bytes. You can write your entire web framework in the length of a tweet, but really that's not going to, if you actually, now we want to add support for, actual hash matching or some other kind of pattern. It's like, how am I actually going to go in and do that? So, there has to be some kind of balance, and I'm not talking about naming all your methods, does connect to device so that it can, there's a balance, and the readability is truly important, especially if you're working with a team. For the speed daemons, for the people who actually do care about speed, and not only care about speed, but it's of utmost importance, I spelled require wrong, there are code loaders like LabJS and Require, which allow you to load stuff asynchronously, so you don't have to load everything, and you can split up your code base, so you only load the things you need. And of course, we all know compilation and compression. You can compress your code after the fact, and there are tools that you can use to do that, and there are ways you can write code that's still readable but compress as well. So, those are two important things. Also, componentization, only taking what you need from a framework and making frameworks small enough so that you can basically split them up. And obviously Ender is probably the newest example of something that's completely componentized so that you only really need to take what you need. So this is more of a, where we go into more of a rant section, but there's kind of this myth that's not specific to client-side frameworks at all, but this myth of the one true way. And the funny thing is that the truth about everything is that there is no one truth. I don't know who said this. No one, I said it. No, I mean, it's someone much greater than me realized this a very long time ago, probably when they were arguing with someone in a cave about how big a mammoth was or something like that. But the truth is that there is no one truth, and that's kind of a Taoist philosophy. But you know, there is a path, and there are things that are better than others, but it's really case by case. And this idea that frameworks have become these religions that just boggles my mind, that people can believe in something so much that they're willing to sacrifice all else and really be zealots for a framework is kind of crazy. So the way you express this is by saying, I'm a Rails developer, or I'm a Backbone developer, or I'm a Samia developer, I'm a Node developer. Obviously, there are differences between platforms and frameworks, but at the baseline, tying yourself to a single anything and labeling yourself like that, you know, really makes it so that no one can talk to you, and you only have this one frame of reference, and I'm this, and everyone else is other, and it's not really a good way to live. The basic thing is that there is no one truth, so you're all wrong, but you're also all right. So if we all agree that there is no one truth, then we can all agree that we can all have coexisting opinions about how things work. Obviously, certain things are true, and certain things are faster, and certain things are slower, but it really is a case-by-case basis. And what I'm trying to say is that altruism doesn't really belong in web development. There's a reason we have different tools, and people will use different tools. And the idea that we tie ourselves to a single tool and keep pushing that forward makes us not open to the rest of the world and excludes people. And that's the worst thing you can possibly do. So I'm not even talking about being framework agnostic, but just be agnostic in general. And that doesn't mean, in a religious sense, that means questioning things, you know? So it's okay to question, is this the best tool for the job? And is this the best framework? Not only is this the best framework for now, but is this the best framework for me? Is this the best tool for me? And that's what it's really about. We're all different people, and we all have different problems to solve. And there are many, many tools out there that solve these problems very differently. And the idea that someone can go on Hacker News and say, like, this framework is the best framework, I mean, it's crazy. I don't understand how we can actually think like that and expect us to move forward as developers and as a community. So the next thing is tied into that in the mix of the next best thing, and that's that when you label yourself, that's also a fashion statement. So if I said, you know, I'm a COBOL developer, then I'd probably get made fun of. I'm not, so don't make fun of me. But if I was, I would be like, oh, okay, you're a COBOL developer. You know, have you been online in the last 30 years? But it's really about fashion statements, and it's about showing off that you're on the bleeding edge, and the bleeding edge cuts you. There's a reason it's called the bleeding edge. But really the best practice is the knowledge that best practices change, and I'm making a lot of paradoxical statements, but the best practice is that best practices are always going to keep moving forward, and it's funny to think that to try to believe that at any given moment you're doing the absolute best practice. Like, 3 years ago or 4 years ago, obviously browsers changed and everything changed, but Steve Suter said, hey everybody, the best practice for delivering JavaScript to the web is bundle everything together into a single JavaScript file and serve it cached to all your clients. Okay? Everyone was like, yeah, now everybody bundle shit now. And everyone did. And now 3 years later, it's like, everyone split up all your files into different small components and use lab.js or require to load them asynchronously. It's like, yeah, let's load them asynchronously. And it's awesome that we're so into these different movements and changes, but being prepared for those changes and knowing that it's not the ultimate solution is the only way to really move forward. And what that means is also, be prepared, but don't, the second you hear about something new, it doesn't mean you have to jump to that conclusion. the fact is that if you're working in a big team in a big app, like rewriting everything, it just really isn't easy. And you want to keep moving forward, not sideways. So moving your entire app from Ruby to Node, if you have 3 weeks and $1 million, do it. I applaud you. Test out the new thing, but it's not really what we're, rewriting. You might learn some new things, but it's not our goal as developers. Our goal as developers is to create new things, and rewriting is hard. I've done it before. It's not fun. So this is going to offend some people maybe, but the myth two is that this equation, it's true that fame and fortune doesn't come from open source. And even though in the age of GitHub, we're all pushing things constantly, when you write a project, you're not Big Bear. You're not instantly, gonna get blunts and bears with sunglasses and piles of gold. It's just not going to happen. That doesn't come from being an open source developer. Maybe you get to go to conferences, it's awesome, and maybe you get to speak like I'm doing to you, but in the end, it's not the end-all, be-all. There are other ways to get to where we are, and there are other ways to be successful. So this is a message that closed source isn't a pure evil. I mean, this is kind of contradictory to why I'm up here, and as an open source developer and someone who contributes a lot to open source, you'd think that I want to open source everything. But you know what? I'm a man of many beliefs, and I think that closed source is not a pure evil. It doesn't necessarily mean that if you're writing something not in secret, but with a team and working together as a team with other people, that won't create a good product. And I gotta say that actually over the past couple of months and past couple of years, I've done some projects that are open source and I've gotten great feedback and it's moved them forward. And I've had other projects that I've kept to myself and developed not in secret, but with a team that's uniquely focused and not this wide world that has a vast array of opinions about what is good and what is bad. And I put some stuff as open source, and the fact is, when you put some stuff as open source, you have to maintain it forever. Basically, that's the contract. And there are some really great things that have come out of closed source software, and I'm not going to even list them because there are probably too many to list. Obviously, there are things that have come out of open source, but the fact is that if you actually, the point is, don't care about pushing first. Write something, do it well, and then maybe if it works for you, it'll work for someone else, but it doesn't necessarily have to work that way. Write what's good for you. Okay, so now I'm going to go into the truths. So the truth of common client-side development is that it's a perilous path fraught with pirates and wizards, dragons, vengeful gods, and it's really, really, really hard. I mean, it's a lot easier than it was 10 years ago, but it's still really, really hard. We're fighting against this ever-changing platforms, not just a single platform, but ever-changing platforms that are constantly changing without us even knowing, or have tiny bugs. Like Malte was even saying today that Chrome, dev channel breaks the Twitter auth, and that's like an example of we have very little control over all the platforms that we deploy to, so it's very, very hard. And but what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. And the fact is that there is no perfect platform, and there is no perfect framework, and there are things that we can extract from these tools that make a lot of things a lot easier, but it still is going to be hard. But so I have a list of what you should demand from a client-side framework. And my demands personally, your demands might be different, are just that it has a clean, consistent API. It has enough structure to help but not hang you and not slow you down. And most importantly, it solves a problem that your app has. You can find a framework that solves a problem your app doesn't have. And a lot of people do that and spend a lot of time working on that. I like frameworks and tools that solve problems that I have. So Samia.js solves a problem that I have, and I'll tell you about it. First of all, Samia is not for everyone, and it's not for everything, but it solves some problems really well. The core thing that it has is a separation of paths or routes with a RESTful ideology. Now, REST is like not just a buzzword, but it's a really, another term fraught with a lot of discussion, and different people believe different things about what REST actually is. But the basic idea of having patterns that map URLs to methods and have that kind of functionality where URLs map to a clear tool. So in this case, this is what a simple Samia app looks like. We define some routes. We say get users or post to users. When we get users, we get the list of users. And I commented out what the actual method bodies do, but it's just pure JavaScript. You can load users from a server, or you can load them from local storage or whatever you want. And then post users, we're mocking a post request basically and accepting a form submission into Sammy. And then inside of the route, we get back a params hash that has all the form elements that were, or form inputs that were in that post. It also supports put and del, not delete. That's because delete's a reserved word in JavaScript and it just breaks everything. So the other thing that it's good at, really good at, or I think, is template rendering and munging. So this is an example in Samia 07 of like what rendering, loading a partial and rendering a template looks like. And it's all it's chained, and chaining in this render context format means that it's asynchronous. It's kind of like promises, but even though those all could be or might be asynchronous calls, they all happen in a guaranteed order. So you're loading a partial, which is just an HTML template that replaces the page. Then you're loading a JSON object from the server that has a list of users, or a user by ID. And then you take a template out of a script tag, which is that user template mustache, which is a mustache template. And then you replace the user selector with that template with the data from the server munged into it. And that does a lot, and I think it's pretty clean. It's obviously, if you don't like chaining, you probably won't like it, and there are other ways to get around it, but I think it solves the common problem of wanting to have data on the server and templates in the client or on the server, and munging them and merging them together and putting them on the client. So what it doesn't include is data modeling. Really, it's trying to be as simple as possible and not decide how you should model your data, so you have to really bring your own. And for me, that means that I have some APIs that are just JSON. I write a lot of Samia apps that don't even talk to a server, that are just client-side. And it does that without bringing the extra weight of having to tell you how to define your model. It's not opinionated in that way. It's agile, meaning it bends well, and it can bend to a lot of different use cases. So, for example, my favorite is prototyping. It's really, 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 really good at prototyping. I don't want to toot my own horn so much, but I find that because it's so small and you can just include it in a page and basically define how a flow should happen entirely in JavaScript and load templates and do that stuff. I've used it in a large number of cases in my team when I can't. I'm not very good at talking. I don't know if you noticed that, but I explain. I'm better at explaining things through pictures and through actually real workflows. And I do that with my team all the time, where I'll say, oh, you're supposed to click on this, and then it goes to this page, and then it redirects back here. Or, oh, you're supposed to have this form on this page, and it logs in, and it should show you this. You can do that and prototype that in Samia without touching a server and just having an index.html template that you load in the browser. And if you're a JavaScript developer that can work with just that, then it's really great as a tool for that. It's really not great for complex data or complex behavioral challenges. I mean, you can use it for that, but I would not probably use it for very, very large apps. It's also not for the developer who needs conventions for everything. If you really want a pattern to stick to and just stick to it, then go for it. But it helps my team and I do our job. So this is the new paperless post design tool that we've worked on for a while. And one of the cool things so Samia is just a small piece of this. Like, there's a lot of shit going on here, and there's a lot of calls to the server, and there's a lot of client-side templating and all that stuff. And Samia really, all it handles is basically driving the state of the application. So you can kind of see up in the URL, probably not actually, but there's a path that has kind of a SHA hash at the end. So the way we work this is that the SHA hash represents a tool state and what's going on in the design tool, and as things change and as you update state, the hash changes, and if you reloaded the page, it would go exactly back to the place you were in the design tool, which is pretty cool. And it's great for that, but the actual methods of the tool and the way the tool works and the interactivity, Samia doesn't drive that. It's really not our entire app, as I said. And I don't think any framework will ever be. There's too many specific things that we need that no framework solves really well. And I think a framework that would have to drive the entire app would bind us too much to a single philosophy, and we really like experimenting. So this is kind of a detour in the last piece, but the truth of work. So the truth of work is that it's really, really, really hard. I don't know about you, but I like my job, but it's still really hard. And good developers, what they want to do is make their work easier and basically make tools that make their jobs easier. So here, I'm going to go on a little tangent. But a couple years ago, we had this transition where everyone started calling themselves developers instead of programmers. And I tried to find the source of where this really started, and I couldn't track it down, but there were a couple mailing list threads about it in like 2003, 2004. But at some point, we're web developers, not web programmers. And I think that's an important distinction. Programmers make machines work. They're the guys who sit behind a keyboard, probably in one of these vaults, and tap the button every 40 minutes to make sure that the world didn't explode. And that's what they did. They just made the machines work. They programmed the machines to make them work. There wasn't really an interaction. Okay, yeah. So sorry. You guys get it. We're here. So then this guy's a developer, right? He's like building stuff. He's going into the ghetto with bulldozers and just knocking it down, right? And building his bright new complex of shiny apartment buildings that rich white people can live in with their dogs. So it's like that's what a developer does. He doesn't just make a machine. He doesn't drive the bulldozer and type and just go like that. That's what a programmer does. Developer, thumbs up. I'm knocking down entire cities. So what developers do is they build and they bulldoze and recreate. They develop something. They don't just program it. They recreate it constantly and they keep making it better. That's the end of the tangent. But so what have we lost sight of? Have we lost sight of what we develop? There's a lot. I mean, we're here at JSConf, so obviously we're talking about JavaScript all weekend, and it's really fun. But what is the core of what we do? I mean, at least for most of us, JavaScript isn't our job. Working on the language of JavaScript and working on frameworks isn't our job. There are a couple people here who are lucky enough to have that job and are really good at it. People who work on Node or work on browsers, and really their product is the framework and the tool itself. For most of us, frameworks are really just made to make our jobs easier. They're not the end goal. So they're really not our job. So why are we spending so much time talking about them? It's kind of weird. And why am I here for half an hour talking about them? But really, frameworks are there to let them guide you and make your job easier. But really, what they're supposed to do is allow you to build something awesome. And that's my message to you guys today, is that it doesn't matter what framework you use. Use whatever you want and whatever makes your job easier. But the end result should be that you're building something awesome. And there are tons of frameworks that let you do that if you let them. But if you just argue about, mine is better than yours, it's really just, it's really just a pissing contest, and it doesn't move the web and our tools further, and doesn't move us as developers further. So my goal as a developer is to bulldoze all those housing projects of the web, the blink tag and everything, and I'm going to make an awesome site that does something awesome for a lot of people, and the tool that I use to do that doesn't really matter. In the end, the users are going to be the ones who are using it, and they're going to be excited, and they're really not going to know that Samia.js was behind it, and they're not going to care at all. So, but if you build something awesome with it, that's the real goal. So that's my time. Thanks, everybody. I'm AQ. Find me after, and we'll drink beer. Thanks.